Here we go. Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Sergio Marrero, and we're here with another episode of RBL1 Live. We have our next guest, Carey, the co-CEO of Loop Insurance. Thanks for joining us, Carey.
Oh, my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Long time in the making. I'm glad I know we rescheduled for last time. Happy belated birthday. and we made it here. So, but wanted to kick it off for those that don't know about Carey. She is co-CEO of Loop Insurance. They've raised over $24 million to date. And she's a graduate of George Washington University and MIT, has a deep background in research and is now co-CEO of Loop Insurance. Can you share with the audience a little bit about Loop Insurance?
Yeah, absolutely. And Sergio and I go back pretty far. We've known each other for years. In fact, we long ago, maybe 5 years ago, participated in an accelerator focused on social entrepreneurship. And the company Loop was really born out of this mission to make auto insurance more fair and equitably priced for more people. What we recognized was that the tradition of financial services is really structurally inadequate for a lot of people, and they end up with really expensive prices for car insurance that really have nothing to do with whether they'll be involved in a crash, but really are proxying for whether they're likely to pay or buy more insurance products. So heavily indexed on your credit score, your occupation, your education, whether you can own your home. And what we found is that today's data and technology, particularly your cell phone and the ability to see where you drive, whether you're driving on very dangerous roads or whether you're driving on safe roads, and how you're behaving on those roads is a much more accurate and fair methodology to provide more people car insurance that is appropriately priced for them. So we launched Loop about a year ago. We are live selling insurance in the state of Texas. Over the last month, we've got about 40,000 miles driven, and we're already beginning to see really amazing opportunities to engage our drivers with that data. Give it back to them to inform them about where it is safe that they drive and where there's opportunities for them to improve their driving behavior and also improve their rate. So,
love it. Thank you, Carey, for that. And I love having entrepreneurs on that are socially and purpose focused, but you're establishing a for-profit business that can be both, which is the challenge in this world. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you can share a little bit about that overarching purpose that you mentioned. You said you wanted it to be, the purpose and the vision of Loop Insurance. You want it to be fair for folks. Can you share more about that? That purpose
absolutely.
that drove you to start?
Yeah, absolutely. And my background for reference is in city planning and urban mobility research. So I try to understand how people live in cities and what really affects their ability to get from point A to point B. And car insurance today is really expensive for a lot of people. It costs anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 for an individual per year, which is a big expense for a lot of folks. And what we noticed was that when we looked at how car insurance was actually priced, people with multiple DUI convictions were ending up with better rates than folks who lived in poor urban areas. No matter, they had no convictions, no violations. And so that to us struck us as deeply unjust and deeply unfair, particularly because a lot of people driving in those neighborhoods were commuters from the suburbs who were getting great rates, but who were driving very dangerous roads. And the people who lived in these communities were really getting penalized for others driving in their neighborhood and bearing the cost and bearing the burden of the financial responsibility that they may have already been, it already was a pretty big expense for them. And what that means for people, right? If we really step away from car insurance jingles and commercials. We can all hum the da 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 da. Like everybody knows what car insurance is. It's not intrinsically a unique product. But when we started to break down why it is that car insurance is the way that it is, we found an institution that is really built on a crumbling foundation where technology has not been adopted. Many car insurance companies, for example, USAA, were still operating on servers in their basement, limiting their ability to not only get data, but use the data that they may have been collecting. And then on top of that, it's a heavily regulated industry. And so companies that had filed rates 50, 60, hundreds of years ago were reticent to change any of those rates because it required them to go in front of state regulators and go through a painful and expensive process of justifying those changes, both to the regulators and then to their investors. So if you're Progressive, if you're Geico, you're just perpetuating the status quo at the margins and the experience that is the status quo from 50 years ago. So for a new company and a CEO like myself and my co-founder, John Henry, to step into, there is opportunity to find efficiencies in the technology itself, be able to use some of the more sophisticated cloud hosting technologies, as well as operationalize artificial intelligence, begin to use a lot of the data that we're collecting to inform who's a great risk, but also from an experience. We could totally recreate, without the rules and without the institution and the 50 years of having something established on the book, a way to price insurance that is structurally entirely different from those in the market, and really play in the shadows or in the pockets of consumers that today insurance carriers are missing. And that's why you see Loop in spaces like Discord. That's why you see Loop engaged in social platforms like TikTok and Instagram, is not because we're saying like, oh, that's cool and trendy and we need to be a part of that. But we're saying our product is built for the modern consumer who lives in those spaces. And to build a relationship with that consumer, we also need to be present for their realities and build content and build information and education that can help our consumer achieve a broader goal of financial health and financial security. So it's a total philosophical change from, I think, what we would say our parents' insurance or our grandparents' insurance. It really hasn't changed much over those generations. Loop is really putting that on our shoulders to say, now's the time and now's the space to question the fundamentals of the institution and redesign them in our own vision.
Feels like it makes a lot of sense, right? Using an individual person's data to come up with what their car insurance should be based on their actual performance. And you talk about using AI, artificial intelligence, in what way, for people that may know a little bit about AI or may not? Can you share a little bit? How does that work?
Yeah, I think folks, when they hear AI, it's either, if you're an investor, you're like, cool buzzword. And if you're an inventor or you're a CEO, you're like, yeah, okay, like that's probably not what's going on behind the scenes. It's probably some sophisticated
like,
data analytics.
You're like, is it a big spreadsheet that just tells you who is risky
exactly.
and who isn't? That's what you're trying to,
decipher. So how I think about AI from a philosophical space is AI is a tool that we use when our brain can't make a good decision quickly, effectively, efficiently. There's just too much information to process all at the same time in order to know the truth. And so we use AI to anticipate where car crashes are going to happen. We ingest a whole bunch of different data sources, things like, is it raining or snowing? So the weather conditions, the traffic volume, are there other cars? Are you driving in traffic? And importantly, we've built this measure of crash predictions based on the historical record of crashes. So we've gone out to the Texas Department of Transportation and departments of transportation across the US and collected hundreds of millions of car crashes over the past decade, mapped them, and built these models that essentially help us ingest all of that different information that if you, Sergio, were on the road driving and you wanted to know how safe is this road, your brain probably couldn't reasonably come up with a good, accurate, and quick answer. that's where we use AI. We say, all right, let's ingest all that data, understand where traffic crashes are likely to happen, and then layer on the information that we're getting from our customers based on where they drive. To become a Loop customer, you download a mobile application on your phone that sends us your GPS coordinates. And then we layer that on top to see if you're the speeder on the bad road, or if you're texting, but you're texting at a stoplight, or you're braking in a school zone where that might actually be a very positive behavior. And reflect that in your rate. So ultimately, that intelligence is used to then make the rate more accurate, give you a better price, and also a better experience. So we've started sharing that data back with our customers. We started seeing people slow down at specific times of day. People avoid roads that are really unsafe. Now that they have that information, they can make better choices for themselves.
That's excellent. So not only using the data to get people better pricing, but also make driving safer.
That's right. Because at the end of the day, if we can reduce car crashes, it actually is better for our customer. I'd rather people not get involved in a car crash, get hurt, or lose their vehicle. It also makes us more profitable as an insurance carrier. So there's a real alignment of incentives to say, let's make people safer.
I want to focus on you as well. I know we've dived into car insurance and there's much more to dive in there. I do want to come back to that. But if you can share, Carey, and have a background in research, a passion for urban planning. How did you go from researcher to co-CEO?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks end up in insurance in a very circuitous path. Very few 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds are like, I want to sell insurance when I grow up. Tom Brady is famously known for saying, like, thank God I got drafted, otherwise I would have to go sell insurance. So it's really not an option of first resort for most folks. But I will say that over my decade of career in academic research at the Urban Institute, the Brookings Institution, and then at MIT, my work is focused on this discipline that I think is really important, and potentially insurance is a great vehicle to manifest the benefits at scale. So my research is mostly focused on urban mobility. Where can you go? What can you access? And can you afford to move around space? So I've done projects that look at, what is the public transportation landscape around your home? Can you get to labor centers or jobs within 90 minutes from your home on public transportation reliably? If so, what is the cost of that transportation? So how much money did it actually cost you to go from point A to point B? And as a proportion of your wage, is that affordable? So for example, you may be somebody that lives in downtown Denver and works at the airport, which is about 90 minutes away. There is public transportation, but it costs $14 one way to commute. And if you're earning the minimum wage is $7.25, is it really an accessible job to you if 2 hours of every day that you work are spent on just getting to and from your job? You're only earning 3/4 of what you would otherwise earn simply because of the cost of transportation. And what does that mean for urban economies and growth? It means that jobs go unfilled. It means that people quit their jobs more frequently. It means that they're more stressed emotionally, financially, and with their time, right? You still may have other obligations like getting your kids to and from school, picked up from school, layered on top of these issues that then really result in what you see is a very strong tie between physical mobility and economic mobility. If you cannot go places, if you do not have the freedom of movement and the privilege of owning, your own vehicle, that really limits your ability to ascend financially and find greater job opportunities and have the ability to bounce around between jobs and maybe access school to go get and further your education. So there's this really strong tie between where you can go and how you move through space with financial outcomes. And you can start to see the bridge over to insurance. We said, look, there are some people who, through no fault of their own, were literally born into the wrong neighborhood, that insurance companies have looked at and said, these are bad risks because they have, a lot of burglary and theft, or they have low levels of education or low levels of credit, that then they justified an increase in rate and made it even more expensive for people to be poor, even more expensive for people to gain access to physical mobility, right? They made it car insurance more expensive, and that's a required product if you want to have your own car. And so I think, and what we're seeing now through clearer glasses is that has contributed to directly to the institutionalized perpetuation of very explicit racism. Because let's be clear, insurance carriers, just like banks, redlined, and they said these neighborhoods look economically depressed, these neighborhoods look Hispanic and Latino, these neighborhoods look Black. Let's make sure that they're priced out of our product. And by doing that, they're just reinforcing these systems that today we spiritually and like emotionally and just we've come to a better place, a more evolved place in understanding how that isn't fair, and that does hold a lot of people back. It's just that the systems are so entrenched and the institution is so large that it's going to take a company like Loop that has this bombastic, ridiculous like thought that we could become, and we will become, the next era of what insurance will look like, and that the big institutions today aren't too big to fail or aren't too big to be provoked into changing the way that they've always done business, simply because it's the right thing to do.
And how did you end up studying this or researching this before you even, if you can share more of that. I know, so when some people have a business idea, they're like, oh, I'm going to make this app, or I'm going to work on this food tech, or, because it's related to my cooking. How did it happen? What was that click or shift for you?
It's definitely not linear. So for other people that may be on their third, fourth, fifth pivot, I'll tell you, I've tried every business model to take this technology that I discovered and invented that predicts where car crashes are likely to happen. And I have tried every business model. I have done B2G, business to government. I have done business to business. And now I am a direct to consumer business. So don't ever give up. Keep trying, keep pushing, because I think LeBron James recently said this, like the only thing that makes him exceptional is that he never stopped trying. And so I started this journey as B2G. We sold this to governments. We went to the city of Chicago, LA, DC, and we said, hey, I think you probably really care about public safety, and you've got these Vision Zero initiatives. You'll see like stickers on taxi cabs, so be careful to open the door so you don't hit a biker, or like trying to reduce crashes on backs of buses. You'll see advertisements sometimes. They had these the political will from mayors to address this issue of traffic safety. So started going to governments and saying, like, will you buy this? What will you buy? Let's create this product around what you need to deploy public dollars more effectively and more efficiently. And what I found was that governments hate to know that they have a problem that they can't afford to fix, because then they are liable in the case that they knew that an intersection was unsafe. And God forbid, a bus full of middle school children gets in an accident there. And now the city has an understanding that something was safe. They didn't invest in fixing it. And the reality is that they're so cash constrained to make any significant investment in meaningful overhauls of some of the conditions on these roads is so beyond their means that actually I found a dead end in business. It wasn't that it wasn't useful. It wasn't that it wasn't valuable, but the people that I thought I would sell it to wanted to stick their heads in the sand and say, we don't have a problem here. So understanding that, I'm trying to build a business around this, I'm an entrepreneur, I have this technology that can literally prevent car crashes from happening. I felt just so necessary that this technology couldn't just be shelved. Every day I get on the road, I would think about, oh my God, like all of these people are getting in crashes. 40,000 people a year die on the American roads. Like, I have the power. I have this thing that could meaningfully actually prevent those outcomes. So I kept going. I started selling B2B. I reached out to a bunch of insurance companies and just literally started knocking on doors and getting meetings. We ended up participating in an accelerator called the FinTech Acceleration Lab based out of New York City that I have very positive reviews of. And they helped us sort of just put our hands into the hands of potential partners who wanted to pilot the technology. That's the best kind of accelerator that you're ever going to participate in, is somebody who can very meaningfully connect you to potential customers who want to pilot, who want to buy your product. There's a lot of accelerators out there that'll like take equity and they try to add value through like fixing your pitch deck, this, that, and the other. Those are trash. You really want to focus on the ones that like very meaningfully can result in sales. And the partnership fund was one of those. So I ended up on the top floors in the financial district meeting with the chief operations officer of Zurich North America and Ajit Jain, who was in line to ascend to Warren Buffett's seat at Berkshire Hathaway, which is Geico, and a commercial lines carrier called Guard, and really getting to the decision makers, because in the insurance business, there's a lot of middlemen. There's a lot of people who will say, that sounds interesting, great, but who don't have the authority to make the level of decision and commit to the level of purchase that this would affect, your top line P&L. It would have to be approved by investors. So you can't just walk in and say, hi, you're the VP of so-and-so department. Like, can you buy this? They can't. So you really had to I had to work my way to the very tops of the pyramids. And when I got there, what they said was no. So I found another.
Why was that?
Dead end. So after about a year and a half of piloting this with some of the newer insurtechs and getting to the tops of the pyramids, which just takes time in these larger financial institutions, what I learned is that the issues that we pointed out that are really great opportunities for Loop. You have a regulated environment where they don't want to go back in front of regulators and change the way that they've been. They don't want the scrutiny of having to justify a change. And they don't have the institutional will to do it. They're very fat and happy, and they're comfortable with the returns that they're making on their investments. Most insurance carriers at scale actually make the majority of their profits based on invested premiums, not actually based off of underwriting diligence. So for them, a product that could risk, losing business on premium that they're collecting and reinvesting, no, it wasn't their first priority to have underwriting diligence, which was the real value that we were bringing, saying like, hey, there are some customers that are driving around right now who you're collecting information. Because remember, telematics isn't also new. Like, you see all the commercials out there that say like, download this app, safe drive discount, and Aaron Rodgers will sell you all kinds of insurance. But the reality was they weren't using that data to figure out who was likely to be involved in a crash. So they're literally flying blind. They rate you based on your credit score, literally. And so it was such a dramatic improvement that we could make, but structurally incapable of being implemented within an incumbent insurance institution, that literally Ajit Jain, the descendant to Warren Buffett, had to look me in the face and say, this isn't wrong. This is huge if you're right, and you should do it, because that's the only way this is going to get to market. And so through another dead end,
so that they can come try to buy or partner with you later. That's the
for sure. I very much expect Geico at some point in time to make an offer to acquire Loop. It is our intention to IPO this business and continue to grow Loop for a long, long time. But I sure as heck believe that, and we know that, frankly, we're not wrong. We're probably not wrong here, that collecting data on where you drive and how you drive is vastly a better predictor over your likelihood of being involved in a crash based on your credit score. Just at a basic data level, the data is more frequent. It is more related to the actual risk. We can actually measure the outcomes. It's a no-brainer. So I think that's going to happen one day, but I did hit this roadblock where he said, all right, you know what? The only way you're going to be able to, I've essentially crossed every other easier option off the list. And I got to, we need to sell this direct to consumer. And so that's when I partnered up with John Henry, my co-founder and co-CEO, because as a technologist and a B2B saleswoman, it is a very different skill to build a consumer-facing technology and a mobile app product that consumers ingest and build a community and a loyal following of potential customers around us, really work those funnels and channels. So it was a beautiful pairing that I had met my co-founder 5 years prior, but knew he had both the competency and also the mission alignment, that this was not about just selling car insurance. This was about deeply restructuring and rebuilding financial institutions and what they mean for people they haven't served, and really refreshing sort of the playing field as it be. And so both from a competency and from a, I guess, technical perspective, he was a great fit, but also deeply mission aligned.
That's great. I was going to dive right into that, into the co-CEO model. I don't see it many places. Can you talk a little bit about why did you guys make that decision to be co-CEOs, and would you recommend it to other founders?
Yeah, I think a lot of investors at first blush see co-CEOs, and what that reads as is there's a power dynamic or struggle between these founders to decide who's going to make decisions or who has the ultimate authority. But our investors have seen through that initial sort of resistance or reticence to recognize that, frankly, in the insurance business, two heads are better than one. We have to do two things really effectively. We have to build a brand that it drives sales, drives growth, drives new customers, and keeps our customers, retains our customers over time. But it's also an underwriting business that requires the proficiency in selecting risk and pricing risk. So it isn't that you want to drive sales at all costs. Like most other businesses, you just want to sell more units, more units, more units. But in insurance, you have to be very careful about what kinds of business that you acquire. Do you want drivers who have had 4 previous DUIs? Like, probably not, because they're going to have a claim, cost you money, and churn to another insurance carrier when their rates go up. And so the lifetime value of a customer like that ends up very quickly getting into the red. We've seen this with our competitors, our fellow insurtechs that have really poured a lot of money into growth and marketing at the expense of underwriting diligence. And it's resulted in, major lawsuits, major financial instability. The markets just cannot support, like, VCs aren't going to support you, like, paying people to have your insurance and then getting customers at a long-term loss. So it requires both of these competencies at a very high level. We also, in addition to having investors that are very interested in understanding the sales story, we have a whole nother sort of constituency that we have to speak to, which is the reinsurance markets. These are folks that will backstop claims in the case that you have major losses. They're there to essentially insure the insurance company. And though, in addition to raising, our most recent Series A round was $21 million. In addition to that, we raised a $30 million reinsurance capacity that allows us not only the $21 million allows us to accelerate our growth, increase sales, and ramp the number of customers that we have, but the reinsurance capacity says, go out and write this business, and if you have a claim, we'll cover it. And so you have to manage both simultaneously. They're very different audiences. Investors very interested in growth, reinsurers very interested in underwriting diligence. So we've found that this sort of dual competency and being able to speak both languages at the very highest level and at the best, having the best and brightest on both, on top of the stack in both regards, gives us incredible advantages. It also is like, on a day-to-day, there is so much for a CEO to do. To fellow founders out there, like, we just completed our annual OKR plan for 2022. John led that effort. It allowed him to be sort of forward thinking, intentional, and go around the teams and really understand what projects they believe are priorities. At the same time, we had a key person leave the company, and I needed to get in the weeds and operational and tactical with our insurance operations team to make sure that, when somebody calls and wants to buy insurance, that the system is still properly propped up and supported, and the processes are working effectively and efficiently, so we deliver on our customer promise. I was in the weeds for the last month, like in Airtable, workflow, process mapping, project managing. Where is this stock? Where is that link? Just to get it like really tight. And I don't think that either of us could have done both things at the same time. And for us, it has just been on repeat, an incredible advantage, again, to have two people at the very tops of their discipline lead the tasks and lead the strategies in which they shine, and excel, and just have two people to focus on when you have to do both things at the same time.
I no, appreciate you sharing that. I do want to dive into, you raised $21 million. You said you guys have been out there for a year. That's incredible, right? It's hard enough for early stage founders to raise. Can you talk a little bit about what were the keys to accomplishing that?
Yeah, so my co-founder and co-CEO, his name is John Henry. He has an amazing social following. I don't need to push any more social following to him. You should follow me. But he's a Dominican American young man, 29 years old, dropout from college, went to a community college in Manhattan, and absolutely brilliant, multi-time founder. Eventually went on to found Harlem Capital with a few other folks, and left that company to really build Loop. And so, he doesn't look like a typical investor. I am a 35 now year old, I just had my birthday, 35-year-old woman who is a technologist, who went to MIT and who is a data nerd, and who just also doesn't really quite fit the mold and the pattern matching that I think a typical investor or traditional investor is looking for. Now, there's certainly a lot of like focus on diversity and inclusion, and there's some advantages that we get for firms that do have a commitment in that regard. However, we did not have it easy. And we look back on the experience and say, John Henry was a multi-time founder and a former VC, and I am an MIT graduate. Like, what boxes didn't we check that we had to spend 6 months on the road, like begging for dollars to build an insurance company in a market that's huge with a value proposition that's incredibly clear, precise, and have raised $30 million in reinsurance capacity from the largest the second largest German reinsurer in the world. Like, we couldn't figure out for the life of us what, like, we would look around being like, is it us? Like, it can't be us, right? Like, something feels off here. And no knock to investors who, have different process, or who felt, through whatever process they went through, that it wasn't the right investment for them, right stage, enough validation for them. But the reality is that, like, it was still incredibly hard for us. And I think it's changed my what I'm willing to say to other founders, that as a statistician, I think in probability, it is like unlikely to the nth degree. Like, there is only a very narrow and small defined crack through which you could possibly raise money from venture capitalists. And a lot of accelerators or others will be like, it's, go out there, and like, through your grit and through your tenacity, you're going to get it. No, it's like showing up to an expert dance class and someone saying, you lead the tango. It is complicated. It is fast paced. If you make the wrong misstep, oops, I went this way instead of that way, conversation over. It is such a complicated and intense experience that now, when I talk to fellow founders who are raising money, it's very easy for me to see who's likely to be successful versus who's not, because of the speed and the experience one must have in order to get into a trajectory like Loop has had. And even then, it was difficult for us. So I caution a lot of up and coming CEOs not to be particularly dismissive of your dream or dampen your enthusiasm about raising capital, but there is a lot to learn there. So it's not something that you can naively stumble into and expect to be able to have that sort of financial support. I think a lot of companies that should exist and should get a lot more capital than they have today don't have the education experience. They haven't been through the process. It was certainly my first time raising money. It was not John Henry's first time, but it was my first time raising money. And I learned a masterclass in what it takes to get an institutional investor to not only put money into you, but put enough money into you that it demonstrates their commitment to your growth, their long-term interest in your profitability. And I think if I had to share some advice, like one of the very key learnings that I made was, I think a lot of companies start small and they raise their seed round at like $1 million, $2 million. That's small today. Like, seed rounds are blowing up. They're huge. Our seed round was $3.25 million. And like the next week there was a $5 million seed. I mean, it's just like, they're getting ridiculous. But the point is that the fund that is going to invest in you needs to invest a certain percentage in your company. They need enough equity in your company to make their investment worthwhile, whether that's 10%, 15%, 20%. Investors will put a chunk of money into you, but they need a certain amount of equity back. And when you start too small, when you ask for only $1 million, the types of investors that will invest that dollar amount for that amount of equity, you're already cutting out some of the top tier institutions that really need to put in a bigger check. And so I learned that you shouldn't back into how much you ask investors based on necessarily how much money you need, but you should back into investors in part based on which partners do you need long-term to grow. If you need a lot of capital, which you do in financial services, in order to exit this business, in order to have a liquidity event, we are going to need to raise subsequent rounds of capital. You are shooting yourself in the foot. You're doing a disservice by starting too small and limiting the pool of investors that can invest in you. And I think that just really flips the dynamic for a lot of CEOs, because you're scrappy folks. We're people that will, it's essentially like free money when you're struggling that early. You're like, sweet, $1 million. You know what I can do with $1 million? But you got to be careful. It's just like not knowing that game, not knowing those rules. It feels like you're winning when in fact you're setting yourself up for a harder, longer, more difficult road to raise the next round of capital, which for us was $21 million. We're on that big boy track now, big girl track, but we wouldn't have been had we not started with that understanding and that knowledge and that experience going into the negotiations.
Excellent. I know we're coming up on time. I want to ask one more question that more future focused. So for the industry, I know we're looking way in the future, but what happens when with more self-driving cars, when cars start driving them, when cars start driving themselves, but we still, how does the insurance industry look like? How does what some of the work you're doing and the impact change?
Yeah, so it's a great question, because we all are fascinated by the future of autonomous vehicles, and we're already sort of in that trajectory. I was in a Tesla recently, and I was surprised at how much it truly can drive itself already on highways and different places, back into parking spaces by itself. So we're already in that world. The reality is that the insurance industry largely is very unprepared for this new reality, because the way that insurance has worked is to experience something, figure out how dangerous it is from that experience, and then price it based on the experience. They're very data driven in their approach. And when you don't have that data to begin with, it leads to a sort of lack of movement. It like shocks them, like fight or flight. They freak out and they don't move at all. And so it's resulted in this real chicken and egg problem, where a traditional insurance carrier just isn't willing to price an autonomous vehicle until it experiences autonomous vehicles, but autonomous vehicles can't get on the road until an insurance carrier is willing to give them a policy. This is largely in part why Elon Musk has launched Tesla Insurance. The traditional insurance carriers vastly misprice Teslas for all of the safety features that they have, but the bumper is very expensive because of all of the autonomous capabilities built into it. And Tesla is making this long-term play to say, hey, actually our vehicles are going to be a lot safer. They're much less likely to be involved in a crash, but even if they are involved in a crash, it may be more expensive, but we're going to have lower volume. maybe higher cost, but much lower volume to be able to compensate for. So different model that the insurance carriers just aren't structurally prepared to accommodate. Now, Loop, where are we at in this dynamic? Is that we've actually gone through the rating and decided that we're going to deprioritize all those factors that relate to the people's hands on the wheel. So we got rid of credit score. We got rid of your occupation. Literally, if you had a blue collar job, you got a penalty. We got rid of education. No longer do you get an additional 15% off because you went to Harvard. Like, no offense, but you got enough privilege and like you have enough advantages in life with your Harvard degree that you don't need a 15% discount. Car insurance, we got rid of home ownership discount. So we no longer serve people who are necessarily getting the best rates because they're able to bundle their home and auto. We think that's unfair that we're subsidizing the cost for people that rent or can't afford to own. So we're getting rid of all of these factors that relate to the people's hands on the wheel. Now, we've retained things like your experience, your previous history of crashes, the points on your license, things that we think, you, while your hands are still on the wheel, matter. But we're setting up the mathematical equation to essentially pull out all of the factors related to you as a person. And that puts us about 15 years ahead of any other insurance carrier in terms of our ability to rate autonomous vehicles. Because if we can actually price you accurately without any demographic information, then it's going to be the same exact policy that we put in place that focuses on the vehicle. It focuses on the road that vehicle drives, because autonomous vehicles will still get hit by other cars, no matter how good they drive. While we're still mixing in the roads, if you drive on an unsafe road, even in an autonomous vehicle, you can still have a claim. And just starting to really understand the dynamics and how it works and what kind of risk the autonomous vehicle would present ahead of having any actual experience driving in one. So I think we're really well positioned to capture that market, and it's in line with some of the partnership opportunities we'll probably be sharing over the course of the next year in terms of large autonomy firms, auto manufacturers who are reaching out to us now, who see that as part of their long-term vision. Their ability to put those cars on the road is that they're going to have to be insured. So more to come.
Well, thank you very much for everyone watching. This was Carey, co-CEO of Loop Insurance. So thanks for joining us tonight, Carey.
Thank you.
And everyone that are watching, this is the last session of this year. So have a happy holidays. And thank you, Carey, for helping us wish everyone off into the holidays. And we'll see you in the beginning of next year. So thanks again for joining us tonight.